we go behind the scenes in the cheese world to chat with people making, selling, or distributing your favorite specialty food products. I'm your host, Janae Muha, certified cheese professional, longtime cheesemonger, and producer advocate. I will always profess my love for cheesemongers, but I have a special affinity for those in the Pacific Northwest because up until recently, we were often overlooked. After the last couple of Cheesemonger Invitationals, where our P&W mongers won or placed highly, our talents have finally seen the main stage. Evey is one of those mongers that stood out in this year's competitions, and I chat with them about getting into cheese, growing up poor in Oregon, and how their identity plays out in the world of cheese.
I'm Evey, and I've been working in cheese, I want to say a little over 3 years. I haven't actually sat down and looked at the numbers, and COVID makes numbers hard. But realistically, because I feel like at times my time in cheese seems small to some people, like 3 years. My route to cheese is fairly small as well, in the sense that, like, basically what happened is about 7 years ago, I came to New Seasons because I wanted out of bigger retail kind of grocery experiences, and just something different. And we all need to work and what have you. And I started out as a freight clerk, and then I became a grocery clerk. And then I was a grocery clerk for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. And what I found was that it's incredibly physical to be a grocery clerk, and I like that, but there is a point at which the body does not. But New Seasons carries just an amazing birth of specialty products and local products. And I had this realization that I loved the stories and I love talking to people about them. I love, like, what do you need a replacement for your recipe? Like, the rest of the grocery crew doesn't know about this one item, but Evey's super weird and does. And that in grocery there, because it is such a big department and it's so much work, there is not a whole lot of time for that. And realistically, it's weird, even though cheese is right next to grocery, your customer isn't as interested in that. So I got to a point where I was like, man, I really just want to be doing something different. And at that time, we were still doing Amazon shopping. Like, we have Instacart now, but we were doing packing orders in store. And I honestly just went and did that for a year. It's kind of really fun. It's like, if you have what I think of as a gamer brain, like, or Tetris brain, it's like, oh, like, how can we pack orders into bags and, like, get them out the door as fast as possible? Like, and it's just you and a cart and your knowledge of the store. So that all works really well for me. Like, I just had a really fun time working by myself. And then we broke up with Amazon and I needed a different gig within the company. And at that time, one of my favorite people in the world, Connor, who is the cheese manager at Grant Park, we had chatted quite a bit. And they were like, well, cheese could be a place for you. And I would always ask them questions about cheese and at the cheese counter. And they broke a lot of my cheese myths or, cheese ideas that float around in the ether and in your brain. And so when I started thinking about specialty, I was like, all right, that could be a thing. But those jobs in our company in the past came up very rarely. People love that job. Like, they don't move from it very often. So what I was thinking was like, man, I just want to be close to home. Like, it was just this constant, like, ooh, I need to get, like, a little bit simpler and a little bit closer to home. And so I just started looking at the Hawthorne New Seasons Market location. And realistically, I was like, well, I don't care. I could clean toilets. I could be a floater. I could be a cashier. Like, at this point, I've decided what I want to do. And so I'll do anything within that. And so the fun and interesting thing is just that I applied for what they call a floater position, where you work all departments, and I didn't get it. And then that day, a cheese department job opened up, and I literally like pooped myself a little. I was like, oh my God, I need this. I need this. So me and Connor actually sat down and had a meeting, and I was like, how do I get this job? Like, because they were like, you'll be great, you'll be fine. And I was like, cool, but like, let's talk interview strategies. And we did, and I got the job. And that was very cool. Like, I was there was a lot of firsts in that. That was like the first time I ever had a job interview that felt like cool and like a conversation. The fun thing about the people I initially worked with in that department is, so Akasha was the department manager, and she had been at that store for, I want to say, like 6 or 7 years in cheese alone. So she had the experience with the company and that department. And then her assistant, Andy, who is now the department manager at Woodstock, he actually has decades of experience in cheese. He worked at a place called The Wedge in Wisconsin, and he also worked with Gordon at Rainbow. So, I was already kind of like in this space of like heartfelt like storytelling, and like I can be such a like little kid about it. I'm like, tell me all your stories and I'll tell you all mine. But Andy is, and you'll relate to this, but Andy is a Cancer as well. And he was like, yeah, let's chat. And we used to just talk and talk and talk. And because of my excitement and like my love for both, like not just cheese itself, but like I really nerd out about all of it. Like where it all intersects is really cool to me. Like, so history, movement of people, like the anthropology, the science, like let's just talk about all of it. And that really surprised him. So we had a lot of fun going back and forth, going both ways with that. And so yeah, and I honestly, that's where I've been. So that's where I still am. I'm the assistant manager now. Basically, Andy got the job at Woodstock. And I had this feeling where I was like, man, I really like, I don't want a different boss. So I really just decided to be one of the bosses, is kind of how that went down. And also COVID, we were doing stuff where we were hiring only in the store location to kind of keep things together. So that was kind of somewhat, it just made sense. That move made sense. And yeah, and like we just really dug in there. And that the living in the neighborhood where I worked, in the past, I've worked in neighborhoods that I couldn't afford to live in. It changed a lot for me, like knowing the people that you serve. That location, for whatever reason, gets people in from the community that are kind of like big names, I guess. I rarely like get starry-eyed for people, or if I do, I don't usually show it the way that other people do. But like, for example, Elias comes to my counter from Olympia Provisions. Eli, he shops there. And so he comes in, and like these people, like I just get nerdy. I really just get nerdy with them. Like, let's talk meat, let's talk beer and wine. Vivian of Ram Cellars would come to our store all the time and do demos, and I just love chatting with her. Like I didn't know anything about wine really until I started talking to her. And so yeah, that's kind of been the long and short of my path in cheese. As far as where we're at now in this last year, so in all of that internet sleuthing, somewhere in there, I found CMI. Like it's really just out there. Like if you type in Cheesemonger, you get like a dictionary post and you get CMI. That's like what you get. And definitely in that first year when I still worked with Andy, I saw it and was like, and I saw videos and I saw pictures, and I was like, oh man, what is that? That's like X Games for cheesemongers. That looks cool. And it just lived in the back of my brain for a long time. It was like, and that was the same year that Sarah Munley won. And I guess that's part of it too. I live in the neighborhood where Cheese Bar was. And in those first months of working at Woodstock, I used to just walk up the street to Cheese Bar, where they would legitimately have like makers and mongers from other countries. I'm at Neil's Yard up there, and they like, at the end of the night, they fed me blue cheese that I'd never had before in my life. And so that's magical too. But yeah, so it did. It was just like this otherworldly thing that just kind of was cool and lived in the back of my brain. And then earlier this year, I know it got postponed. It's normally in January for San Francisco, and it got postponed. Oh, and so I saw a post in like, I want to say early March or before March, maybe late February, that was like, if you want to be here, you can be here. And so I was like, well, I'm not doing anything else. And I'm sitting on a little bit of like, I don't leave the house COVID money. So like, maybe we just go do that thing. And that, I mean, there's a lot of CMI between there and here, but like, that's mostly my cheese journey. I don't know if you want me to keep going into the CMI stuff.
We will definitely delve into that, because I definitely have some questions about that. I think that one of the things that sticks out to me is I also have a grocery store cheese background. And I think that one of the things that is really gets taken for granted from some other shops and whatnot is the amount of knowledge that you have to have as a grocery store cheesemonger, because you're not just answering questions behind your counter. You're answering questions for literally everything. And coming from that grocery world too, like you have to have real world knowledge of recipes and whatnot. I learned more about specialty foods from just the random questions that people would ask me about, like, this recipe I have has this weird thing. I have no idea what it is. And I'm like, I got you. I know what this is. I know exactly where it's at. And I know what the replacement is if we didn't have it. So we're good. And that is truly a skill that I don't think a lot of people get to have, is like learning on the go like that. And you're just kind of forced to learn whether you like it or not.
It's definitely a kind of resourcefulness that at times I think is taken for granted, both within the grocery industry and outside of the grocery industry. But in my mind, like, for example, if I was going to hire a clerk and I could have a really in-depth conversation with them about it, honestly, if they're completely devoid of anything else but resourcefulness, we can work with that. I'll show you where to find it. I'll show you how to do it, and you can figure it out for yourself.
So let's continue the conversation about CMI then. So you competed in January or in March. I'm so used to saying in January just because it usually is. You competed in San Francisco. There, we'll clear that up. You competed in San Francisco, and then you also just went and competed in New York City. And I believe it was a conversation that we had where you had said that you were kind of in San Francisco on the low end of the group, let's say. And then in New York City, you made it to the top 6. I would love to hear like what you did to like get to that point, or what kind of a switch in your brain did you have to like do? Because when I competed in CMI, I had to have talks with my therapist about it, because I'm not a big competitive, like I'm too competitive, and that's the problem. So I had to have talk myself down that this isn't about the competition. It's about learning and connection and community and whatnot. So that's why I'm really interested in this kind of trajectory just over a couple months.
For sure. So I think it all starts with like, so when I because what happened is I found out about CMI, and I looked up, because I totally will look things up before I ask anybody. It's just sort of what I do. It's part of my process. And so basically I saw a post that was basically like, this is happening. If you want to be here, you can be here. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, and all I saw was just the actual event, like the public event. And I went, oh, it's like one day. Like, you just fly down to San Francisco for a couple of hours, take a couple of hours and a couple of days, and like that could be fine. And funny enough, I actually booked everything as that. And then I was looking at like, oh, there's education days and a competition. And all I can really say is that I I wanted those education days so much. I was just like, man, meeting makers and like talking to other mongers, because like COVID isolation for sure, but in general, like something I talk about is that mongering can be, depending on the shop that you're in, a lonely gig. It's like you and a customer, and that's it, and that's only sometimes. Um, and some people love that, some people don't. And sometimes you can just strike a really good balance with it. But basically, I found on the website, I was looking all over the CMI website for all the information I could, and I found some little button that was like, if you have any questions, email. And so, from what I gather, all of these email buttons just go directly to Adam Moskowitz. I'm pretty sure that he answers everything. And I was at work on my break and I sent an email that was basically like, look, I want to be there. I want to learn. I want like all these things, but I don't, because I want to really appreciate that for other people, competition is a goal and winning is a goal, and that is a motivation for them. And it's no small thing. And so I was just very much like, I don't care about the competition. So can I not? Like I wish I had the email pulled up, because I really feel like I literally just said like, can I just not do the competition? And the short answer was no. And the long answer was literally like, let's talk about it. And we started talking about it, and he sent me like the welcome packet that mongers get when they first show up, to show you like hour by hour what all of the things look like. And I started having, which I've come to realize in the last few years is really important for me, to visualize in my brain how to move forward with things, especially things that I don't yet know how to do or can't visualize myself. And what literally within like 24 hours, and he was like, just like, but before I could even answer emails, he was sending me more emails as his thoughts were like thinking about it, because he just loves to motivate mongers so much. Where basically I had another feeling where I was just like, oh, you're going to do this. Like, I can't really explain it other than that, is that my brain just went, well, that's really wild, but I guess we're just going to go do that. And that, I mean, I feel like I'm actually really still in that, but that's kind of the antithesis of what that first CMI was. And then there was just a lot of like my like conversations with myself about how to do that competition for myself. Because if you have that feeling that's like, oh, this is good and we're moving forward, for me, as other things come in, like, oh, well, people want you to present in this way, or they really want you to like win, or they like, that didn't feel right. And so it was just kind of like this process of like, and then like getting back to what I wanted to. And so part of what came out of that is, so CMI San Francisco, my whole game was, I'm going there to meet 30 new friends and to potentially more, because I had counted out how many competitors there were other competitors. And working a small shop, we don't make boards, we don't do regular pairings, we barely have time to taste the cheese ourselves, these kinds of things. I also was like, I don't know what I don't know, so I can brush up, I can learn some stuff. But realistically, if someone from another shop who has all this kind of experience that I wish I had shows up and does a board better, well, I can't really, you know what I mean? Like, I can't really do much about it. Um, and, and it just worked really well for me personally. So what's very interesting about this conversation is that while we can say on paper, like, and just to be specific, because I don't mind being specific, is that I placed last in San Francisco, but I came out feeling so enriched, right? Like, I placed last, but I so didn't care, to the point that actually, like, they don't share those results with you unless you ask. And I didn't. I just walked away. I was like, I don't, that was great.
I
Like,
didn't I didn't ask any questions. I was like, I'm okay with whatever just happened, and that's good.
right, 100%. And I literally, I cannot convey this enough, but I literally, with bated breath, waited for the date to drop for New York. And the small background in that is that I love New York. I fell in love with New York when I was young, like in my 20s. It was one of the very first places I traveled to alone just because I wanted to. I went back and visited for friends who moved there, and then regularly because they were there. And I just love that city. So I had this moment where I was like, cool, so we're going to do that thing, but over there. And I had an awareness of the kind of cheese situation happening in New York. So I was like, cool, we can bank on that too. um, and again, I still just didn't, at that time, and I don't know that I do now, but like, I didn't care about the competition. What I understood the competition to be was how we basically celebrated the end of the education, right? Like, that's sort of what the competition is to me. How do we, like, kind of show off and like showcase things that we've learned or where we've learned before? And also with that sort of piece of making 30 new friends and like community and stuff between San Francisco and New York, I literally just started talking to people. And I thought to myself, what is the worst thing that they could do? Like, to block me on IG? Like, I just didn't care. Like, I hate to say that, but it was like a real step forward as far as like, in order to put yourself out there, there is a certain amount that you just have to respect, however people will react to you or treat you. So in between CMI San Francisco and New York, Amelia sent me books. You know, I researched stuff, but I also like kind of let my what knowledge I wanted to learn drive me. Like, I was just like, if I got bored with something, like if I was like, oh, it's too sciencey right now, I might flip back to like something more romantic, like taste or something like that. And realistically, and logistically, for New York CMI, we didn't get our cheese assignments until 2 weeks before we were to be on stage doing that thing. You know, I had the benefit of like having the knowledge of how CMI goes, kind of, to help me. So I was like, well, as soon as it drops, then I do this, this, and this, and kind of planning it out that way. But yeah, so I feel like if there was anything that was like mainly different, so like I went to CMI in New York and I placed 5th, I think, out of 6. Is that how New York went, or did we have 5 on stage? Do you remember?
There's 6.
6. Okay. It gets really blurry once you're on stage.
Those lights, you know, the cameras, the lights, the whole thing.
The whole thing, right? Dancing cow costume. Yes. But basically, as soon as my cheese dropped, and I literally just started, like, again, amassing sort of the community, like, all right, Amelia, here's the cheese, like, and then talking to someone else, and then talking to my wine steward, researching. So one of the cheeses I got was Baracato al Pepe, which is an Italian peppered kind of cheese situation. And I was like, well, what else is in that region? Like, what else is over there? You know, that kind of idea of like pairing with the same area that's growing in kind of a situation. And even when I got there in town, I had somewhat of a game plan of what I was going for. But even when I got there in town, I was allotting time to like, oh, I'm going to go to this paper shop to see what they have to make my signs. I'm going to go to this shop and talk to this person. I forget her name, but right next to Green Grape, where Amelia works, there is a wine shop that's part of Green Grape, and their wine steward there is amazing. And so I went to talk to her. I talked to my friend Lauren, who's a wine steward in Portland. I met with her and we tasted cheese and talked. And so it's like learning while also connecting with people and like finding out again where you can find your resources. And that I really just wanted to do better for myself, like more authentically present my ideas around cheese to that community, because I had a lot of ideas of how I should present in San Francisco. And then I sort of made more of a decision in New York. And apparently that equaled being on stage. Like, I don't feel a direct connection to the sort of like winning, if you know what I mean. But like, I can see how like it's like a validating thing where it's like, look at you being all authentic and like yourself and comfortable, and you were appreciated for it. And that to me was the biggest takeaway. I could have, like, even if I didn't place on stage, that would have been my takeaway anyways in New York.
That's amazing. And I think that that's a very, it just says a lot that like, if you lead with authenticity and you lead with what you love, then you will get exactly what you want, which is
Right?
more connection and more community and knowledge. So I love that.
Right. Well, and I really just want to say this one thing, that it's part of it to me was also trusting. Because like one of the main things that blew me away at CMI is in New York is that I did all of the research, but the wine that I paired my cheese with for the cheese and wine pairing, I had never physically tasted that wine. But I took my knowledge of cheese, I conveyed it to someone else who I trusted to have knowledge of wine, conveyed it back to me in a way that I could choose to spend $40 on a bottle, to have someone at CMI who I respect so much grab my arm in a hallway and go like, your pairing was so delicious. Oh my God. Like, I still think about that moment.
That's it. Trusting yourself is also a piece of authenticity that rewards big time. So I love that story. And I loved, I'm sad I wasn't there for New York, but I did constantly scroll, and Kira was doing lives. So I was popping on every time she went live, and I was keeping tabs on you. I got very excited when I saw you on stage. One of the things that we've really connected with is that we both grew up in Oregon, and we both grew up pretty poor. And now we're in these positions of working with products that are seen kind of more as pinkies up and like fancy. And our clientele tends to be people who have a lot more money than that I've definitely ever seen before. And so I just kind of want to talk about that and how that shaped how you like your feelings about food and how you eat, and just would love some thoughts from you about that.
Like, I did grow like, okay, so history is that I grew up really poor in Portland, Oregon. I've been around that spot. We were in Hillsborough for a bit and some other places, but been around mostly there my whole life. And Realistically, like a lot of how I approach food comes from the way that my mom managed being poor. So obviously we were poor enough to be getting government subsidized food boxes, and it's a little different now, but at that time, what we're actually talking about is not like a food bank, not like a box of like grocery store rejects, but like a legit box of like a hunk of cheddar that's labeled with the government's name on it, and like an undescript can of coffee, kind of a situation. Um, and these really basic things. And that realistically, we were receiving those even when mom was working, just because of how poor we were. And we lived in an area that's called St. John's, that is now much more upper scale. It's a little weird to go back there sometimes, but um, mom cooked all the time. Mom is an amazing cook. And she, what I love about my upbringing around food is that um, she had no chill for like the same food all the time. So we were always eating something different. And when we went out to eat, we ate different stuff. And when you think about it, it also makes sense from a poor standard, because if you're poor but you want to eat out, you're gonna like go to the authentic like Mexican or Vietnamese restaurant who are serving good, delicious food, but on the cheap, right? And so what mom also taught at home was that these are the things that you can skimp on. Like, here is your bulk. We don't even know like basic pasta noodle, but like, here is your chunk of Parmesan Reggiano, and you don't really mess with that. And if you have a chunk of Parmesan Reggiano, here is how you care for it and keep it in the fridge if you're not using it all the time. And this kind of idea of like, of understanding how quality comes together, but it doesn't have to be expensive necessarily. When I eat cheese, when I taste cheese, when I'm talking to customers about cheese, realistically, like the customer situation, I have a joke at the counter, which is that I like to be the cheese therapist or your cheese dad, which is cheese therapist and cheese dad really don't care. They just want you to be happy. So, like, you come to the counter and you tell me you want cheap cheddar. Yeah, it's over there. Like, no shame. But you come to the counter and you say, what is your best Gouda? I will tell you. Like, I will tell you, like, what is the best quality? What's the best tasting? If you tell me that that's not worth it to you, then I will show you the cheap Gouda. Like, it's just, and that's, is that we don't have to be pinkies up. To me, the pretentiousness is like just completely, I am completely 100% uninterested, because it makes the conversation more complicated than it needs to be. It can be a very rewarding and simple conversation, and the pretentiousness just sort of clouds that, unfortunately.
I would love to talk a little bit about identity and moving through the world in any sort of identity that doesn't fit directly within the binary is difficult in any framework where we are in the world. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about how your identity fits into the cheese world and how you feel about that.
Sure. So for anyone who doesn't know, I identify as agendered, which is a non-binary identity, that where basically the way that it relates to me, and it is incredibly personal for everyone, is that I just don't experience gender at all. Yeah, kind of like just not at all. And when I do, like when it feels like closer to me or someone is putting that on me, it feels awkward. Um, So, and it's taken me a very long time. And actually, I really feel like it required like other people to come up with a word to make me go, oh yeah, that has helped me. Because this in some ways is still very new and recent to me. One of the big parts of CMI for me was like that basically so this last year, two big things, because I had kind of been putting them off and they take a long time and lots of money and processes. Two big things was like, I need to change my name and I want to be really open about my stuff. Like, no, like mushy, like, oh, let that person not know and let these other people know and that kind of stuff. And that if you're going to go make 30 new friends, you just got to be real upfront and honest about that kind of stuff. So my gender identity and how I identify, and honestly, some of the neurodivergent stuff I feel like plays into that too, because these are things that you end up telling people, and potentially it can change how they view you. They might treat you differently or whatnot. Is more than anything, I feel like what I've noticed as far as like specifically cheese counter and how that works out is two things. Is one, there is a delightful amount of diversity in cheese and in specialty food and in the specialty food service industry. Like I know we're out there, like everything from like, a variety of genders to a variety of races, like, just a lot of diversity there. But for me specifically, since it is just so unique to the one counter I've worked, is how much I get to interact with that world, which has been not a lot. So Connor, who's at Grant Park, I felt very lucky to work with them because they are so unabashedly queer and genderqueer as well. And we got on very well and made a very safe space for each other. That when I went to Hawthorne, it was still pretty good, but I miss them very much for that. And that as you get more authentic and comfortable, it can be a little more jarring the more that when that doesn't happen for you. So, regardless of how you might tell someone, if they misgender you but it just basically that sometimes the internally constantly fighting that wave can be exhausting. That it's not, the representation is not as, it's getting better. Don't get me wrong. I actually have seen some things recently because of CMI that I'm like, I'm excited for the future, but for a very long time, and especially during COVID, and part of the reason why I went to CMI in San Francisco is I was having a deep, profound feeling of like, I don't even know that this industry wants me. Like, I don't even know that like I should be here or I could be here, like in an authentic way. Luckily, I was proven wrong, but that is the really truth of it. And that like all of the ways that we interact with people are really important, regardless of where you are, in small ways and big ways. So there's still a lot of work to be done in the various places, because even just as someone who is femme presenting, I still get like I miss Andy sometimes, because he used to just tell a customer twice if they didn't take an answer from me, because that's still a thing, that like my answer is not seen as holding as much weight as someone who is male presenting. And that's Bummer Town, but that's where we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. I actually had an experience once where a guy came to the counter and didn't he was like, you don't know anything about cheese. You're a woman. You couldn't possibly know anything about cheese. So I had my beer buyer step in and we had to play this game of telephone from I was 2 feet away from my beer buyer. The guy would ask my beer buyer a question and then he would turn and ask me the question. I would say the answer and Sam would relay it back to the guy. And we did that because it made him look really dumb. And he was on a date too. So like he looked real dumb in front of his date. And we did it on purpose because like I knew more about cheese than Sam did. And that's just like when it came down to beer, Sam could have answered that question. But yeah. But thank you for being so open about it. And I one of the things that I love about cheese is the fact that it does feel in my realm of like the time that I spent around the beer and wine world, it did feel very bro-y and really don't enjoy that too much. So being able to be around more people that are questioning their genders or just asking that question of themselves, it's so much more, it makes me feel more at home as who I am as a person. So I appreciate all of it. We have more work to do in the industry. That is for sure, especially surrounding how white the industry is. But hopefully we are working towards a different realm.
I'm hopeful. And I really think that honestly, just talking about it, like you talk about the white bro-y stuff, like some of the way that I push back on that is like literally just not showing my disinterest, like not pretending, like being like, okay, cool. So yeah, like I think that we are on a good path as far as the industry goes.
Still lots of work to do, but is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would love to hit on before I head to the speed round?
Honestly, the only thing that I can think of is just that I have and I know that we've talked about it, so it's kind of why it was on my mind, is just that I am so excited for ACS to come to Portland, because in the conversations that I've had with cheese people outside of Portland, I think there's not as much awareness of like how cool we are. Like, is that egotistical? But like, especially after this year, like, Sam, who is like the most delightful human. I love him so much. He won CMI in San Francisco, like I said, Sarah Munley over at Cheese Bar. And like that, just, we have a lot to offer. So I just really can't wait for ACS people who maybe don't know much about us to come see what we have to offer.
And I think, especially in the last few years, outside of, Steve Jones won like the second or third CMI. Right. But I think that for a long time, people really thought that like Steve was the only worthwhile cheesemonger in the Pacific Northwest. And I think in the last couple of years, we have proven that we have some top-notch cheesemongers in the Pacific Northwest that are to be reckoned with.
And that we span the board, right? Like, so I come from New Seasons, which is a grocery counter. Sam comes from Cowbell, which is mostly a distributor. And then Sarah from Cheese Bar, which was, a shop and a food place.
Yep. We've got all kinds. We've got all kinds. All right, let's move on to the speed round.
Okay.
First one, what is your current cheese crush?
Ralph, who makes the butter. Rudolph.
Makes,
yeah. He brought us his smoked goat log and his fresh cheese to taste. And I'll tell you, I'm a little embarrassed about it, but especially the fresh one was so good to me that like I dropped F-bombs in the classroom to describe it to him. And then like from the looks of my peers, immediately regretted it.
I don't think you have to regret that.
No, given the fact that when we were at the fancy food show, he winked at me from afar.
Oh, he does that all the time. He's a winker.
I actually really loved it. Normally would find that super creepy, but that was
Yeah, Rodolph gets a lot of concessions when it comes to winking at people, I think, more than a lot of other people. So we'll let him keep it. We like it.
Right. But yeah, you can remember the name of those two cheeses so that we can share them with the people out there. But his fresh one and his smoked one are just so good.
I don't know the name of the fresh one, but the smoked one was the Roulet Fumé.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is pretty amazing. And from when I interviewed him, he was talking about how that was a combination of his trip to Japan and the United States, and just the culmination of those inspirations. So it's really cool to kind of see something so delicious come from like a multitude of inspirations.
Yeah, 100%.
Favorite cheese pairing, just across the board. What do you usually go to?
So it's funny because I still feel so much in a learning vibe. I spend a lot of my cheese allotment is honestly just stuffing new stuff into my face and seeing if it works. So there's a lot of that. But when I think about like if I'm going to spend my money, if I'm going to indulge, and especially if it's just going to be me and no pinkies up, just like video games and TV night, I want more than anything a like small format Brillat Savarin to myself and a bag of pepperoncini kettle chips is what I want.
Okay, I could see that. The fat, the vinegar, the crunch.
Yeah. And you just scoop it out with the chips. Like that cheese is so like delicate and like silky, you just scoop it right out.
Right. I love that. Okay, last one. Top food memory.
It's funny, I know you asked this question and I had thought about it. Now it's whatever I had thought is gone. Realistically, I really feel like I don't have one in particular, but like top memories, like really like warm, just like cozy memories, is that mom didn't really, especially when I was little, I was very curious about whatever she was doing in the kitchen. She didn't really like trust me to do anything in the kitchen. She would talk to me while she was in the kitchen and she would delight me with whatever question I had. And so what I really remember is like occupying a corner of the kitchen while she would just answer whatever weird food questions I might have. And when I got a little bit older, we would play with math too. Like, how do you know how to put how much flour in the cake or whatever? And it's like, yeah, there's a recipe, but also mom did a lot of alterations and stuff. And so we would talk about that. Um, and just those early memories around gathering food to like make food, to share it, are probably top tier for me.
That sounds fantastic. I also spent a lot of time at the kitchen table when my mom cooked, asking all sorts of ridiculous questions. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, and also for showing yourself authentically. And that even though it's very vulnerable, it can be scary in so many ways, that it is proving to be a worthwhile venture for you, and I love seeing it. So
thank you. And so far, like you said, it's definitely scary, but if we just accept that as part of the menagerie of feelings, it has really been amazingly rewarding. So I really appreciate this new cheese community I have found for fostering me in such a delightful way.
it's wonderful finding a connection in cheese, but it's truly top-notch to find someone that has shared many similar life experiences also. Thanks for taking time out, Evey, and continuing to show up in your truest form. This podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me, Janae Muha. Thank you to Ben Muha for allowing me to use your music. Follow along on my cheesy adventures at Instagram, Facebook, or get the whole conversation at Patreon. My website is also a great hub for all of my goings-on. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep spreading the word of good curd.